the corporate jungle, the loudest predators often get the attention. But it is the silent observer, the one who watches, who endures, who truly understands the terrain, and eventually learns how to reshape it. For Liam, this philosophy was about to become the very blueprint of his existence, forged in the cold, sterile fires of a conference room named Synergy. The room smelled of industrial-grade cleaner and quiet desperation, a place where careers came to die under the hum of fluorescent lights. He sat perfectly still, his hands resting on his lap, a stark contrast to the storm raging within him. Across the polished mahogany table, his boss, Marcus Vance, slid a thin folder towards him. It was a meaningless gesture, a piece of corporate theater. The decision had already been made. Marcus cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense silence. "Liam," he began, his voice oozing a brand of synthetic sympathy that was more insulting than outright anger. "As you know, Innovatech is constantly evolving, realigning our strategic goals. After a thorough review of the team's recent performance metrics, we've had to make some difficult decisions." Next to him, a woman from Human Resources, whose name Liam had already forgotten, offered a tight, rehearsed smile that didn't reach her eyes. Then came the words, the two carefully chosen daggers designed to kill a man's professional pride. "Underperformance," Marcus said, letting the word hang in the air. "And a lack of cultural fit with the team's new direction." Liam felt the air leave his lungs, not in a gasp, but in a slow, silent leak. Underperformance. The accusation was so absurd, so fundamentally untrue, that it momentarily stunned him. He thought of the countless nights spent sleeping on the office couch, the weekends sacrificed, the very architecture of Project Chimera that had flowed from his mind onto the screen, line by painstaking line. That was his soul in that code, his life's work for the past 2 years. His gaze drifted past Marcus's self-satisfied face towards the glass wall of the conference room, and that's when he saw her, Chloe, his work best friend, the one who knew his coffee order by heart, the one he had trusted with every frustration and every breakthrough. She stood in the hallway, pretending to be engrossed in a conversation, but her eyes darted towards him for a fraction of a second. In that fleeting glance, he saw it all, a flicker of pity, quickly masked by a calculated look of surprise. She turned away, her shoulders slightly hunched. In that moment, the puzzle pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The fabricated metrics, the anonymous peer feedback, the stolen credit for his recent breakthrough. It all led back to her. The pain of losing his job was a dull ache, but the searing agony of this betrayal was a physical blow. A cold wave washed over him, extinguishing the last embers of his shock, replacing it with a profound, chilling silence. He didn't fight, he didn't argue. He simply nodded, his expression unreadable. He had seen the predator, and he now understood the terrain. To understand the depth of the betrayal, you must first understand the man who was betrayed. Liam was not just an employee at Innovatech Solutions, he was an architect. While others built spreadsheets and presentations, Liam built worlds. His world, for the past 2 years, was a universe of intricate code and elegant algorithms named Project Chimera. It wasn't merely a software project to him, it was a living, breathing entity. He knew its every strength, its every flaw, its every secret corridor of logic. Chimera was a revolutionary data analytics platform designed to see patterns in chaos, to find a single, whispered truth in a hurricane of noise. In the right hands, it was worth a fortune. To Liam, it was simply beautiful. He was a quiet, unassuming man, the kind of person who would rather spend a Friday night refining a piece of code than navigating the loud, performative social circles of the corporate world. He believed, with a charming naivety, that good work was its own reward, that talent and dedication would always, eventually, be recognized. He found a quiet joy in the hum of the servers late at night, in the solitary pursuit of a perfect solution. This quiet dedication made him incredibly productive, but it also made him blind to the predators circling his creation. The first of these predators was Marcus Vance, the director of project management. Marcus was a man built of charm and ambition. stitched together with expensive suits and a dazzlingly white smile. He spoke the language of synergy and deliverables with a fluency that captivated executives and clients alike. He was a master of the boardroom, a skilled political operator who knew how to take the complex genius of others and distill it into a simple, compelling story for those who signed the checks. To Liam, Marcus was a mentor, a guide through the corporate labyrinth he didn't understand. Marcus would clap him on the back, call him a rock star coder, and tell him, "You just focus on the magic, Liam. Let me handle the dragons upstairs." Liam trusted him, believing Marcus was his champion, his advocate in rooms he himself would never be invited into. He saw Marcus's requests for simplified summaries and high-level diagrams as a necessary part of the business, never once suspecting they were tools for Marcus to slowly, methodically, erase Liam's name from the narrative of Chimera's creation. Marcus saw Chimera not as a beautiful piece of engineering, but as a golden chariot that would carry him to the coveted corner office of a vice president, and he had no intention of letting its creator ride along with him. The second predator, and by far the more dangerous, was Chloe. To Liam, Chloe was not a colleague, she was his anchor. She was the one who remembered to bring him a sandwich when he'd been coding for 10 hours straight. She was the one who would listen patiently as he tried to explain a complex problem, not because she understood the technical details, but because she understood him. They shared lunches at a small sandwich shop away from the office, complaining about the bad coffee and dreaming about the future. Liam had told her things he'd never told anyone else about his family, his insecurities, his quiet pride in what he was building with Chimera. He trusted her implicitly. When she asked for access to his development server to help organize the documentation, he gave it without a second thought. When she suggested creating a shared folder with all his research and foundational code for backup purposes, he thought it was a brilliant idea. She was smart, witty, and seemed to be his biggest cheerleader. "Marcus is so impressed with you, Liam," she would say, pouring him another cup of coffee late at night in the deserted office. "He's telling everyone on the executive floor that you're the next big thing." These words were a balm to Liam's imposter syndrome, a confirmation that his hard work was being seen. What he didn't know was that Chloe's last name was also Vance. She was Marcus's younger cousin, a secret they had both carefully guarded since she joined the company. Liam had once noticed they seemed overly familiar at a company party, and when he'd asked, Chloe had laughed it off. "Oh, we're like third cousins or something? Super distant. I barely knew him before I started working here. It would be so awkward if people knew. They'd think I got the job through nepotism." It was a masterful lie, delivered with the perfect amount of casual dismissal. In reality, they were close, their ambitions intertwined. Chloe's role was to be the spy, the inside woman who could gain the one thing Marcus couldn't: Liam's complete, unguarded trust. Every breakthrough Liam shared with her over a celebratory lunch was summarized and fed to Marcus that evening. Every self-doubt Liam confessed was cataloged as a potential weakness. Together, they were the perfect team. Marcus operated in the open, charming the higher-ups, while Chloe worked in the shadows, mining the trust of the very man they planned to destroy. Liam, the silent architect, was so focused on building his cathedral of logic that he never noticed the foundations were being systematically hollowed out from beneath him by the two people he believed were there to help him hold up the roof. The shift was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, like the change in barometric pressure before a storm. The easy, collaborative rhythm of the project began to develop a slight, jarring syncopation. It started with a missed calendar invitation, a high-level strategy meeting about Chimera's Q4 rollout. Liam only found out about it when he saw the group, including Marcus and Chloe, emerging from the main boardroom, laughing and holding coffee cups. When he asked Chloe about it later, she waved a dismissive hand, her expression a mask of casual apology. "Oh my God, Liam, I'm so sorry. I thought Marcus's assistant sent it to the whole dev team. It was super boring, honestly. Just budget stuff. You didn't miss anything." He believed her because he wanted to. It was easier to believe in a simple administrative error than to confront the unsettling alternative. But the errors began to compound. Marcus, who once sought Liam's input on every minor decision, started making significant architectural choices without consulting him. He would announce them in team meetings as foregone conclusions. Great news, team! We've decided to pivot the UI framework to something more streamlined. It's going to be great for the user experience. When Liam tried to interject, explaining the massive back-end refactoring such a change would require, Marcus would cut him off with a placating smile. Already handled, Liam. Chloe and I pulled an all-nighter and mapped out a workflow. We need you focused on the core algorithms, my man. Don't get bogged down in the weeds. He framed it as a favor, a way of protecting his star engineer from distractions, but it felt like a muzzle. Liam was being told to build the engine of the car, but he was no longer allowed to see the steering wheel or the roadmap. Chloe's role also began to morph. Her friendly support slowly sharpened into a relentless forensic curiosity. She would spend hours at his desk, not just chatting, but watching him code, asking questions that were becoming unnervingly specific. "Walk me through the memory allocation module one more time," she'd ask, her phone on the table, ostensibly taking notes. "I really want to understand the genius behind it." It felt less like admiration and more like an interrogation. She was no longer just a friend. She was a student trying to rapidly absorb a curriculum he had spent years creating. The true moment of violation came on a Tuesday afternoon. An email from IT announced a planned server maintenance that weekend with a small risk of data corruption. Chloe appeared at his desk within minutes, her face a theater of deep concern. "Liam, I'm really worried," she said, her voice low and serious. "What if something happens? All your work, the heart of Chimera." "It's all on that one server." He assured her that there were automated backups, but she persisted. "I know, but what if the backups fail? We need a physical, air-gapped copy for insurance." She produced a sleek, black, external hard drive from her bag. "Let's just copy the entire project directory. Everything. The source code, the commit history, your research notes. I'll keep it in my drawer, just in case. Please, Liam. It will make me sleep so much better." He hesitated. Every instinct screamed no. It felt deeply wrong, like letting someone photograph the private pages of his diary. But she was his best friend. She was just being careful, just looking out for him. To refuse would be to admit he didn't trust her. So, with a heavy heart, he dragged the Project Chimera master folder onto the drive's icon and watched in silence as a blue progress bar slowly, inexorably, copied his soul onto her device. When it was done, she gave his shoulder a grateful squeeze. "Thank you. You won't regret this." The words would later echo in his mind, dripping with a venomous irony. Meanwhile, Marcus was busy building a gilded cage for him. He called Liam into his office one afternoon, closing the door for an air of confidentiality. He leaned back in his expensive leather chair, a picture of success. "Liam," he said, his voice full of gravitas, "I've been in meetings with the CEO. He's not just happy with Chimera, he's ecstatic. This project is going to redefine this company. And when it does, we're creating a new advanced analytics division." He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "I've told him there's only one person I trust to run the technical side of that division. I want you as our first head of technology." The offer was breathtaking. It was everything Liam had ever dreamed of. "Of course," Marcus continued, "it means I need you to be 1000% focused on getting the product over the finish line. Don't worry about the presentations, the stakeholder meetings, the corporate politics. That's my world. That's the noise I'm paid to handle for you. You just deliver the genius, and your future is secure." It was the perfect manipulation. It simultaneously validated Liam's worth, promised him his ultimate dream, and explicitly instructed him to ignore the very warning signs that were now blaring all around him. He left the office feeling dazed, his anxieties momentarily silenced by the roar of his own ambition. The isolation became complete. He was an island in the middle of his own project. Decisions were made, deadlines were shifted, and features were promised to clients without his knowledge. He was a ghost in his own machine. The final, chilling piece of foreshadowing came on a Thursday night. Working late, he went to the main network printer to retrieve a document. Lying forgotten in the output tray was a high-level presentation deck. The title slide read, Project Chimera, a strategic vision by Marcus Vance and Chloe Vance. He flipped through the pages. They were his architectural diagrams, his flowcharts, his concepts, all beautifully rendered in the company's official PowerPoint template. His name was not mentioned once. He wasn't a contributor. He wasn't the lead architect. He didn't even exist. He stood there, under the cold office lights, the cheap paper feeling heavy as lead in his hands. The air in the empty office suddenly felt thin, hard to breathe. The trap was no longer being set. He was in it. He just hadn't heard the snap. The folder lay on the table between them, a slim, manila-colored tombstone marking the death of his career at Innovatic. With numb fingers, Liam pulled it towards him and opened it. The words inside were a masterclass in character assassination, a tapestry of lies woven with just enough truth to be plausible to an outsider. The first page was a performance review summary, signed by Marcus. It cited a consistent failure to meet project deadlines. Liam's mind reeled. He remembered the nights, the weekends, the frantic rewrites after Marcus would return from a meeting with a client and announce a complete change in specifications, prefaced with the cheerful words, "Good news. We've got some great new ideas." Deadlines weren't missed. They were moved, sabotaged, made impossible by the very man now condemning him for it. The next section was titled Peer Feedback, and it was here that Chloe's work was most apparent. His intense focus was reframed as an unwillingness to collaborate. His quiet, heads-down work style was twisted into creating a siloed and uncommunicative environment. There was even a quote, attributed to an anonymous team member, stating that Liam was often defensive and resistant to constructive criticism. He could almost hear Chloe's voice saying those exact words to Marcus, taking their private conversations, his moments of creative frustration, and weaponizing them against him. The final page listed a series of critical bugs he had supposedly introduced into the system. He recognized them instantly. They were from an experimental branch of code, a daring new feature he and Chloe had discussed. She had encouraged him to push the boundaries, saying, "Don't worry about breaking things. That's what innovation is all about." Now, his innovation was being presented as incompetence. "Marcus, this is a fabrication," Liam said, his voice quiet but steady. He looked from Marcus to the HR representative, a silent plea for reason, in a room devoid of it. "You know the context for every single one of these points. The spec changes, the experimental code. Chloe was there, she knows." Marcus leaned back, steepling his fingers. The friendly mentor was gone. In his place sat a cold, corporate executioner. "Liam, your perspective is noted," he said, the words sterile and final. "But the data is the data. The impact on the team's morale and the project's timeline is undeniable. The decision is final." The HR woman slid a thick packet of exit paperwork across the table. Severance agreements, non-disclosure forms, the sterile logistics of his own erasure. There was no room for appeal. He was no longer a person. He was a liability to be managed. An awkward security guard, a man Liam had often shared a friendly nod with in the mornings, was waiting outside to escort him to his desk. The walk through the open-plan office was the longest of his life. A hush fell over the floor as he appeared. The usual symphony of keyboard clicks and quiet chatter died down, replaced by a thick, uncomfortable silence. He could feel dozens of pairs of eyes on his back. People he had worked with, mentored, shared jokes with, now stared at their screens with a desperate intensity, as if the most fascinating spreadsheet in the world had just appeared before them. He was a ghost walking through his own life, a living spectacle of failure. He reached his desk, his small cubicle that had felt like a second home. The guard handed him a plain cardboard box. He began to pack, his movements slow and deliberate. His favorite coffee mug, a gift from his sister, a worn copy of Code Complete, a small, framed photo of his parents, a little figurine of a robot that he would fiddle with when thinking through a problem. Each item felt impossibly heavy, a relic from a life that had just been declared over. He was packing away not just objects, but the routines, the ambitions, and the identity he had so carefully built within these gray walls. He was taping the box shut when a shadow fell over him. It was Chloe. Her face was a perfect mask of heartbroken sympathy. Her eyes were even glistening slightly. It was a truly remarkable performance. "Liam," she whispered, her voice choked with fake emotion. I can't believe this. I'm so sorry. I went to Marcus. I told him he was making the biggest mistake of his life. I fought for you. I really did." Her words were like acid. He felt a bitter laugh rise in his throat, but choked it down. She reached out and pulled him into a hug. It was a cold, brittle embrace. He could smell her expensive floral perfume, a scent he had once associated with friendship and comfort, but which now smelled of decay and deceit. As she pulled away, she leaned in close, her lips near his ear. "Don't worry," she whispered, her voice a conspiratorial breath. "I'll make sure Chimera is taken care of. I'll protect your legacy." That was it. That was the final, perfect twist of the knife. She wasn't just stealing his job and his creation. She was claiming his very legacy, and she had the audacity to frame it as an act of selfless friendship. A profound, icy calm settled over Liam. The rage, the hurt, the confusion, it all melted away, leaving behind something harder, something colder. He didn't say a word. He simply looked at her, his eyes holding hers for a long moment. He let her see the full, unvarnished truth of her betrayal reflected in his gaze. He saw her falter, a flicker of genuine fear in her eyes before she quickly composed herself and scurried away. He picked up his box, which now contained the entire sum of his last 2 years. He walked past the averted eyes and the whispering colleagues, through the lobby and towards the automatic glass doors. As they slid shut behind him with a soft hiss, he didn't look back. The sun was blindingly bright outside. He was unemployed, betrayed, and utterly alone. The architect had been cast out of his own cathedral. The first morning was the most disorienting. For years, Liam's body had been conditioned to the rhythm of a 6:30 a.m. alarm, a quick shower, and the ritual of a strong black coffee before heading into the office. But on that Friday, no alarm rang. He woke up at 9 to the jarring silence of his apartment, the sun already high in the sky. The silence was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that smothered all thought. There was no code to write, no problems to solve, no team to lead. His purpose, the central pillar of his entire adult life, had been kicked out from under him overnight. The days that followed blurred into a gray, monotonous fog. He would sit on his couch for hours, staring at the blank television screen, replaying the scene in the conference room again and again. He'd dissect every word from Marcus, every flicker of fake sympathy on Chloe's face, searching for a sign he had missed, a clue that could have warned him. But there was nothing. The betrayal had been perfect, seamless. Anger came next, a hot, useless rage that burned through him. He drafted a dozen emails he would never send. Scathing, detailed takedowns of Marcus's incompetence and Chloe's deceit, addressed to the CEO, to the entire board of directors. He imagined their shocked faces as they read the truth, but he always deleted them. It would be his word against theirs. He was the disgraced, underperforming ex-employee. They were the star project director and his brilliant protege, the saviors of Project Chimera. He had no proof, only the intimate knowledge of his own work, a currency that now had no value. His anger, with no outlet, curdled into a bitter, suffocating despair. He felt like a ghost, haunting the edges of a world that had moved on without him. The city bustled outside his window, people rushing to meetings, living their lives, while his own had ground to a halt. After a week of inertia, a desperate survival instinct kicked in. He needed a job. He needed to get back on his feet, to prove them wrong. He spent a full day meticulously updating his resume, the process and exercise in quiet agony. How did one describe their life's greatest achievement? Project Chimera. When it had been stolen and used as the weapon to execute you. He wrote and rewrote the description, his words feeling hollow and false. The most difficult part was the reason for leaving. Terminated, he typed, then deleted it. The word was too ugly, too final. He settled on the bland, corporate-friendly lie. Left to pursue new opportunities following a successful project milestone. It felt like swallowing glass. He sent out applications to every tech company he could think of, from nimble startups to established giants. In the first few days, the activity felt good. It was a semblance of control, a proactive step away from the abyss. But then, the silence began to answer him. Applications vanished into the digital void. The few responses he received were polite, automated rejections that felt more insulting than no response at all. While your qualifications are impressive, each one was another small confirmation of his worthlessness. Then, the nature of the rejections began to change, becoming more specific, more ominous. A phone screening with a recruiter from a promising startup went exceptionally well. The woman on the other end of the line was enthusiastic, impressed by his deep knowledge of data architecture. The conversation was flowing, easy. Liam felt a flicker of hope for the first time in weeks. Then came the inevitable question. So, it says here you just left Innovatech. Can you tell me a little bit about the circumstances of your departure? He gave his rehearsed, vague answer about seeking new challenges. There was a pause. I see, the recruiter said, her voice suddenly cooler, more distant. It's just that, well, Innovatech is a small world. I may have to make a few calls to our contacts there, just for due diligence. I'll be in touch. She never called back. A similar thing happened a week later, and then again. A pattern was emerging. A cold dread began to crystallize in his gut. They weren't just firing him, they were salting the earth. He imagined Marcus on the phone with a hiring manager, a friendly, professional tone in his voice. Liam? Yeah, a brilliant coder. Absolutely. But a real lone wolf, not a team player. We had to let him go after some performance issues and a few missed deadlines that put a major project at risk. A real shame. A few well-placed, deniable words were all it took to poison the well across the entire industry. They hadn't just taken his job, they had taken his name. The lowest point came on a rainy Tuesday night. He hadn't left his apartment in 3 days. The blinds were drawn, and the only light came from his laptop screen. He had opened his personal backup of Chimera's source code. He scrolled through the millions of lines of text, a language only he truly understood. He saw the comments he had left for himself in the middle of the night, jokes and reminders. Note to self: get more coffee before attempting this again. He saw the elegant simplicity of a solution he had spent a week perfecting. This code was a map of his mind, a diary of his passion. It was his, and yet it wasn't. It belonged to Innovatech now. It belonged to Marcus and Chloe. They were likely presenting it in a meeting at that very moment, calling it their own. The grief was overwhelming, a physical weight on his chest. He had poured his life into a creation that had been stolen, and he had been erased from its story. He slammed the laptop shut. The screen went black, reflecting his own face back at him, a pale, gaunt stranger with hollow eyes. He stared at his reflection for a long time, the silence of the room pressing in on him. He had nothing. He was nothing. The abyss had finally found him. But as he sat there, in the absolute darkness, something new flickered to life deep within the wreckage of his spirit. It wasn't hope. It was something colder, harder, and infinitely more dangerous. It was resolve. This was not the end. They thought they had buried him, but they had made a grave miscalculation. They had buried a seed. The resolve that had solidified in the darkness of Liam's apartment was a cold, hard thing, but it lacked direction. It was a weapon without a target, an engine without a chassis. He needed a map, a guide, someone who could see the entire battlefield, not just the trench he was trapped in. He forced himself to open his laptop and began scrolling through his professional network contacts, a digital mausoleum of his past life. The names and faces blurred together, colleagues who now averted their eyes, managers who had offered empty platitudes. Then he stopped. A name from a decade ago, from a time before the corporate world had tried to grind him down: Professor David Chen. David Chen was more than just Liam's graduate school thesis advisor. He was a legend, a prodigy who had written foundational code for the first-generation internet David had long since hung up his coding gloves to become one of the most respected strategic minds in the technology sector. He was the founder and managing partner of Orion Strategy Group, an elite consulting firm that didn't just advise corporations, it reshaped them. CEOs paid fortunes for an hour of David's time, for his uncanny ability to see the hidden patterns in the market, to identify the single point of leverage that could topple a giant or build an empire. He was known for his brutal honesty, his unwavering integrity, and his complete intolerance for the kind of corporate politics that had just consumed Liam. Reaching out felt like an impossible act of hubris. Liam was a failure, unemployed, and blacklisted. David Chen operated in a different stratosphere. The thought of appearing before his old mentor as a broken man, begging for a job, was mortifying. He almost closed the laptop, ready to retreat back into the comfortable misery of his despair, but the cold resolve in his gut pushed back. He wasn't going to ask for a job. He wasn't going to ask for a handout. He was going to ask for advice. He would approach his mentor not as a victim, but as a strategist presenting a complex problem. He spent 2 hours drafting an email, polishing every sentence until it was lean and precise. The subject line was simple: a question of strategy. He started by reintroducing himself, then got straight to the point. "I find myself at a professional crossroads," he wrote, "and was hoping I might borrow a few minutes of your time. I was the lead architect on a next-generation analytics platform with significant market-disrupting potential. Due to an internal restructuring, I am no longer with the project. I believe the strategic value of this asset is being fundamentally misunderstood by its current holders, and I would be immensely grateful for your perspective on the situation as a theoretical case study." He attached a single, high-level white paper he had written about Chimera's core philosophy. He hit send before he could lose his nerve, his heart pounding in his chest. The reply came in less than an hour. "Liam, of course I remember you. Your thesis on algorithmic efficiency was brilliant. I'm free tomorrow morning. Let's get coffee. My office, 9 a.m. The warmth and speed of the response was a shock, a single ray of light piercing through his gloom. The next morning, Liam put on his only good suit, feeling like an imposter. David's office was nothing like innovatic. It was on the top floor of a historic building, lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with worn volumes on history, philosophy, and mathematics, not corporate self-help guides. The air smelled of old paper and fresh coffee. David Chen greeted him with a firm handshake and a warm, genuine smile. He was older, with silver hair at his temples, but his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. "It's good to see you, Liam," David said, gesturing to a comfortable leather chair. "Now, tell me about this case study of yours." Liam took a deep breath. He started by explaining his departure from Innovatic, stating the facts calmly and professionally, without a trace of self-pity. "My role was eliminated following a leadership change on the project." Then he pivoted, and the energy in his voice shifted. He opened his laptop, not to show lines of code, but to show the beauty of the design. He walked David through the elegant architecture of Chimera, the neural networks, the predictive modeling. His passion, so long suppressed, came flooding back. He was no longer an unemployed engineer. He was an artist explaining his masterpiece. "This is the core of it, Professor," Liam said, pointing to a complex diagram on the screen. "Chimera doesn't just analyze past data, it learns. It anticipates. It can model future market shifts based on whispers of data that other systems would dismiss as noise. It's a crystal ball, if the crystal was made of pure mathematics." He then laid out the strategic blunder. "The current leadership at Innovatech sees Chimera as a product, a piece of software to be packaged and sold for a one-time fee. They're trying to sell a telescope as if it were a simple magnifying glass. They don't understand that its real value is as a managed service, an intelligence nerve center that a major corporation could build its entire future strategy around. The platform isn't the product, the insight it provides is the product." David listened intently, his eyes fixed on Liam, his fingers steepled under his chin. He asked a few penetrating questions that cut straight to the heart of the technology and its business model, questions that showed he understood it all on a profound level. Liam answered each one with clarity and confidence. When Liam finished, David was silent for a long moment, a slow smile spreading across his face. It was not a smile of pity, it was a smile of discovery. "They didn't just eliminate your role, Liam," David said, his voice quiet but intense. "They amputated the project's brain and left the body twitching. This is a colossal, almost beautiful, blunder." He stood up and walked to his window, looking out over the city. "Liam, I want you to stop looking for a job, stop sending your resume to anyone. Go home, get some rest. I have an idea, but it's ambitious. I need to make a few calls." He turned back to Liam, his eyes gleaming with a strategic fire. What Innovatech fails to understand is that in today's world, the person who builds the telescope doesn't just sell it. They get to decide where it's pointed. And I think we should point it somewhere very, very interesting. Liam walked out of that office feeling taller, the weight of the past few weeks lifting from his shoulders. He didn't have a job offer, but he had something far more valuable. He had an ally, and he had a plan. The call came 2 days later. Liam was staring at the ceiling of his apartment, trying to muster the energy to do laundry, when his phone buzzed. The caller ID simply read, "David Chen." Liam's heart leaped into his throat. He answered, his voice a little shaky. "Hello?" David's voice was crisp, energized, and devoid of preamble. "Liam, can you be at my office in an hour? Something has developed." The line went dead. There was an urgency in his tone that spoke not of problems, but of opportunity. When Liam arrived at the Orion Strategy Group headquarters, he wasn't led to David's quiet, book-lined office. Instead, he was guided into a glass-walled conference room that buzzed with a quiet, intense energy. It was a war room. 3 of the walls were floor-to-ceiling whiteboards, covered in complex diagrams, market projections, and competitor analysis. A team of 4 sharp, impeccably dressed analysts sat around a large table, their laptops open, financial data streaming across their screens. David stood at the head of the table, looking not like a retired professor, but like a general commanding his forces. He gestured for Liam to join them. "Liam, I'd like you to meet my core strategy team," David said, introducing each person by name. They nodded at him with a professional respect that felt utterly foreign after weeks of being treated like a pariah. David clicked a button on a remote, and the main screen at the end of the room lit up with the logo of a global financial behemoth, Blackwood Capital. "This, Liam, is our largest client," David began, his voice low and steady. "They manage close to $1 trillion in assets. For the past 6 months, they have been engaged in a very quiet, very expensive global search for their holy grail, a true predictive analytics engine, something that can give them a quantum leap ahead of the competition. They've reviewed solutions from every major player, from Silicon Valley to Tel Aviv. Nothing has met their needs." David paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Yesterday, after our conversation, I sent your white paper stripped of any identifying details, of course to my primary contact at Blackwood, their chief strategy officer. He called me back an hour later. He said, and I quote, 'Find me the people who built this. I don't care what it costs.'" Liam felt a dizzying sense of vindication. It was real. His creation was as powerful as he'd always believed. "This presents us with a fascinating strategic problem," David continued, starting to pace. "We have a motivated, high-value buyer. And we have a unique asset, Project Chimera, being held by a company, Innovatech, that is fundamentally ignorant of its true worth. They are, as you so brilliantly put it, trying to sell a telescope as a hammer." He outlined the options on the whiteboard. Option A, acquisition. We could advise Blackwood to simply buy Innovatech or the Chimera IP. But the moment a name like Blackwood or Orion comes knocking, Innovatech's board will get greedy. The price will become irrational. It will be a long, ugly, and expensive fight. Option B, competition. We back you. Orion provides the seed funding, and you build Chimera 2 from scratch. You have the talent to do it, I have no doubt, but the market window is now. Blackwood needs a solution within the next fiscal year. A ground-up build would take two. Too slow. He stopped pacing and turned to face Liam, a predatory gleam in his eye. Which brings us to option C, the Trojan horse. The most elegant, and for our purposes, the most satisfying solution. He leaned against the table. We don't buy the asset, Liam. We seize control of it. We are going to approach Innovatech not as buyers, but as partners. We will say that we represent an anonymous, high-profile client who is very interested in the Chimera platform. We will tell them that while the core technology is promising, it is nowhere near enterprise-ready for our client's needs. The analysts around the table were smiling now, seeing where this was going. So, David continued, Orion Strategy Group will offer to fund the next stage of development. We will provide the capital, the project management expertise, and the strategic oversight needed to make Chimera a world-class, market-ready platform. In return, our client gets an exclusive, multi-year license. Innovatech's board will leap at this deal. They get a massive influx of cash. They get the immense prestige of a partnership with Orion, and they get to keep their precious IP. They will see it as the deal of a lifetime, with zero risk. Liam was stunned by the audacity of the plan. It was brilliant, but he still didn't see his place in it. But what's to stop them from continuing to sideline the real work, from feeding you the same lies they fed me, he asked. David's smile widened. Ah, that is the final, crucial piece. A plan like this requires absolute oversight. The client needs someone on the inside, leading the engagement, who can verify every line of code, every progress report, every single claim the Innovatech team makes. Someone who knows where all the bodies are buried because he helped dig the graves in the first place. That person, Liam, is you. He let the statement hang in the air. We are going to hire you, effective immediately, as a senior consultant for Orion Strategy Group. You will be the public face of this engagement. You will be the lead technical strategist representing the client. Marcus Vance and Chloe Vance will no longer be your superiors. They will report to you. You will have final say on technical direction. You will approve their milestones. You will scrutinize their work. You will hold all the power. The room fell silent. Liam stared at David, unable to process the sheer poetic justice of the proposal. It was a revenge more perfect than any he could have dared to imagine. It wasn't just a new job. It was a throne. A switch flipped in his mind. The hunched shoulders of the victim straightened. The haunted look in his eyes was replaced by a sharp, analytical focus. In that moment, he ceased to be the fired employee and became the client. The rest of the day was a blur. He was no longer on the outside looking in. He was in the war room, at the whiteboard, working alongside David's team. He was identifying the key weaknesses in Chimera's current state that could be used as leverage in the contract negotiation. He was helping draft the brutally specific service-level agreements and key performance indicators that he knew Marcus and Chloe would be utterly incapable of meeting. He was forging the very chains that would soon bind his betrayers. At the end of the day, David slid a small, heavy box across the table. Inside were business cards. On the crisp, white linen, beneath the elegant Orion Strategy Group logo, were two words that changed everything. Liam Hayes. The architect was back. And this time, he wasn't just building a platform, he was building an empire. The days that followed were an education in the art of corporate warfare. Liam was no longer just a coder. He was a key strategic asset, his mind the primary resource in the crafting of a masterpiece of legal engineering. The Orion War Room became his new home. Guided by David Chen and Orion's formidable legal counsel, he began to deconstruct Innovatech not as a former employee, but as an opposing force, identifying every structural weakness, every procedural flaw, every vain executive who could be leveraged. His intimate knowledge, once a source of pain, was now being forged into a weapon. They are arrogant, Liam explained to the team, pointing to a flowchart of Innovatech's project management process. They value the appearance of progress over actual progress. Marcus will generate dozens of vanity metrics, lines of code written, tickets closed that mean nothing. He'll create beautiful reports that are completely disconnected from the functional reality of the software. David Chen listened, a slow smile on his face. "Good," he said. "Arrogance creates blind spots. We will build our contract to live in those blind spots." The document they drafted was more than a contract. It was a cage, meticulously designed and baited. Every clause was a steel bar, disguised as a standard corporate term. Liam was instrumental in shaping the most critical sections. The first was what David called the Radical Transparency Clause. It stipulated that the client, for the purposes of quality assurance, reserved the right to perform unrestricted, real-time audits of all source code, commit histories, and internal development servers. It was framed as a way to ensure seamless collaboration, but Liam knew it was a key to the kingdom. It would prevent Marcus and Chloe from ever hiding their incompetence or falsifying their progress. There would be nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The second was the key personnel mandate. This clause stated that the project's success was contingent upon the performance of designated Innovatech personnel, who would be subject to rigorous, data-driven performance reviews by the client. Crucially, it gave the client the right to request the immediate replacement of any key personnel if performance metrics, as defined by the client, are not satisfactorily met. It was a hidden eject button, placed directly under Marcus and Chloe's chairs. Finally, Liam insisted on the validated milestone proviso. Standard contracts tie payments to milestones, but this clause added a critical step. No milestone would be considered complete, and no payment would be disbursed until it received formal technical sign-off from the client's own lead technical strategist. "Marcus will try to rush things," Liam explained. "He'll declare a feature complete when it's still a buggy mess, just to hit a deadline. This makes my signature the final gateway for every dollar they receive." It gave him absolute granular control over the project's flow and, more importantly, its funding. With the weapon forged, it was time to approach the target. A formal letter, printed on Orion Strategy Group's heavy, cream-colored letterhead, was dispatched by courier to the office of the CEO of Innovatech. The language was deliberately formal, slightly aloof, and dripping with prestige. It spoke of representing a confidential client of global significance and a potential synergistic partnership to develop Innovatech's promising but nascent Chimera platform. The effect at Innovatech was electric. The name Orion Strategy Group was legendary. For them to approach Innovatech was like a king visiting a small provincial town. The CEO, a man named Henderson, who Liam had only ever seen from a distance, immediately summoned Marcus to his office. To Henderson, this was the ultimate validation. Marcus, in turn, was ecstatic. His chest puffed out. This was his triumph. He had taken Liam's little research project and turned it into something that had attracted the biggest name in the strategy world. He saw a multi-million-dollar bonus and a fast track to the executive suite. The negotiation was a masterfully executed piece of theater. David Chen led the call, flanked by his legal team. On the other side was Henderson, a team of Innovatech's lawyers, and a beaming Marcus Vance. Liam was not on the call. His existence as Orion's new consultant was the ace that would not be played until the very end. Innovatech's lawyers pushed back on minor financial details, and David's team offered carefully planned concessions, making Innovatech feel they were winning a hard-fought battle. Then they arrived at the critical clauses. "The level of server access you're requesting is highly unusual," Innovatech's lead counsel said warily. David didn't flinch. "It is standard procedure for our client," he replied, his tone cool and unyielding. "Their investment is substantial. They require complete transparency to mitigate risk. It is, I'm afraid, non-negotiable." He said the same of the key personnel and validated milestone clauses. He framed them not as demands, but as unchangeable requirements from a powerful, unseen client. Innovatech's CEO hesitated. The terms were unusually restrictive. It was Marcus, blinded by ego and the dazzling prospect of the deal, who sealed his own fate. "Mr. Henderson," he interjected smoothly. "This is how the big players operate. It shows they're serious. My team is more than capable of meeting these standards of transparency and performance." We should see this as a vote of confidence in our abilities." He looked at the CEO, his expression radiating confidence. He was so sure of his ability to charm and deceive his way through any situation that he willingly volunteered to have his hands and feet bound. With Marcus's enthusiastic endorsement, Henderson agreed to the terms. The signing was an anticlimactic, digital affair. A click of a mouse in 2 different buildings, and the trap was set. At Innovatech, champagne corks were popped in the boardroom. Henderson clapped Marcus on the back, calling him the company's new rainmaker. Marcus, feeling like the king of the world, found Chloe and told her the news. He promised her she would be the new official project lead, reporting directly to him. They celebrated their victory, completely unaware that they were celebrating their own surrender. Miles away, in the quiet, focused war room at Orion, the atmosphere was one of cool satisfaction. An analyst confirmed the digital signature had been received. David Chen printed a copy of the fully executed contract. He walked over to Liam, who had been watching the entire exchange from a separate office. He placed the heavy document on the table in front of him. "It's done," David said simply. "A declaration of war, gift-wrapped as a partnership. The keys to your old kingdom." Liam picked up the contract. His fingers traced the lines of Clause 7.4, the validated milestone proviso. He read the words that had been written for him, about him, pending final technical approval from the client's lead technical strategist. The title was no longer a future promise. It was now a contractual reality. He was no longer a ghost. He was an authority. The stage was set. The hour of his return was at hand. The day of the official project kickoff arrived, cloaked in an atmosphere of triumphant anticipation at Innovatech Solutions. The main boardroom, a space usually reserved for shareholder meetings, had been prepared with meticulous care. A fresh pot of expensive coffee brewed in the corner, and a platter of pastries sat untouched on a credenza. Marcus Vance was in his element, pacing the length of the room like a general before a decisive battle. He wore a brand new Italian suit, the fabric shimmering under the recessed lighting. He was the man of the hour, the visionary who had landed the largest, most prestigious partnership in the company's history. His team, a hand-picked group of developers and project managers, sat around the long mahogany table, a mixture of nerves and excitement on their faces. Chloe stood by the main presentation screen, clicking through the slides one last time. She looked immaculate, her business attire sharp and confident, her hair pulled back in a severe, professional style. She was the newly minted project lead, a title Marcus had bestowed upon her the day the contract was signed. She and Marcus shared a brief, knowing glance across the room, a silent toast to their shared victory. They had done it. They had taken Liam's project, cut him out like a tumor, and elevated it and themselves to heights he could never have achieved. They were waiting for the delegation from Orion Strategy Group, the mysterious and powerful client they had worked so hard to impress. "All right, team, listen up," Marcus announced, stopping his pacing to address the room. "These people are the best of the best. They represent a client with bottomless pockets and sky-high expectations. We need to be sharp, confident, and completely in command of the material. This is our moment to show them that their investment is in the right hands. This isn't just a contract, it's a validation of our vision." Right on cue, the heavy oak door of the boardroom swung silently open. An assistant held it as 2 figures entered. The first was a man whose presence immediately commanded the attention of every executive in the room. It was David Chen. A ripple of awe and recognition went through the Innovatech leadership team. The David Chen, a living legend, was here in their office. This was an even bigger deal than they had imagined. Henderson, the CEO, immediately stood up, a broad, welcoming smile plastered on his face. But it was the second figure, the one who walked in just behind David's shoulder, who made the air in the room freeze. He was tall, straight-backed, and wore a perfectly tailored, dark charcoal suit that screamed quiet authority. He moved with a calm, deliberate confidence that was utterly unfamiliar. But his face was the stuff of their recent, discarded history. It was Liam. The transformation was absolute. The quiet, slightly stooped coder, who practically lived in worn-out sweaters and jeans, was gone. This man was a stranger, an immaculately polished instrument of corporate power. He looked like he had been born in a boardroom. His eyes, once mild and easily diverted, were now clear, direct, and held a chillingly calm focus. The sequence of reactions was a silent, slow-motion car crash. Marcus's beaming smile froze on his face, twitching at the corners. His brain struggled to process the conflicting data. That's Liam, the guy we fired. What is he doing here? Is he a caterer? Did he come to beg for his job back? Then his eyes took in the suit, the confident posture, the position of honor next to David Chen, and the pleasant confusion curdled into a thick, sickening dread. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a pale, waxy mask of disbelief. His mouth hung slightly open. Chloe's reaction was faster, sharper. A small, strangled gasp escaped her lips, a sound she immediately tried to swallow. Her perfectly manicured hand flew to her throat as if to stop her own heart from leaping out. She recognized the existential threat instantly. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a mistake. This was a reckoning. She looked like she had just seen a ghost she had personally murdered, now returned from the grave, not in chains, but on a throne. David Chen, seemingly oblivious to the silent implosion of two of Innovatec's key employees, stepped forward. "Good morning, everyone," he said, his voice filling the cavernous silence. "Thank you for hosting us. I'm David Chen, managing partner at Orion. I'd like to introduce my team and your primary partner on this engagement." He gestured gracefully towards Liam. Liam took one step forward. He did not smile. He let his gaze sweep across the room before landing, with surgical precision, first on Marcus, then on Chloe. He held their terrified stares for a beat too long, letting the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. When he finally spoke, his voice was everything. His old voice was not. It was level, devoid of emotion, and carried an undeniable weight of authority. "Good morning, Marcus." Chloe. The use of their first names was a casual, intimate assertion of dominance. "I'm Liam Hayes, Senior Consultant and Lead Technical Strategist with Orion Strategy Group." He paused, letting the title detonate in the silent room. "From this point forward, I will be your primary point of contact, and I will be overseeing the entire development lifecycle of the Chimera project on behalf of our client." The statement landed with the force of a physical blow. The last vestiges of color drained from Marcus's face. Chloe looked like she was going to be physically sick. The other Innovatec team members stared, their mouths agape, looking back and forth between their pale, trembling bosses and the ghost who now stood before them, speaking with the authority of a king. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted, it had been utterly and irrevocably shattered. Before anyone could recover, before a single word could be uttered, Liam moved. He walked calmly to the head of the table, the seat Marcus had just vacated, and placed his sleek, Orion-issued laptop down. He opened it, his movements economical and precise. "I've had a chance to review the preliminary project plan and the code repository you shared with us," he said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "There are a number of significant architectural discrepancies and potential performance bottlenecks that we need to address immediately." "Marcus," he said, looking directly at his former boss with cold, analytical eyes, "perhaps you can begin by walking me through your team's justification for abandoning the original multi-threaded caching architecture in favor of a single-instance query model. I'm particularly interested in the data from your stress tests." It was checkmate in the first move. He had asked a deeply technical question he knew, with absolute certainty, that Marcus could not even begin to answer. The triumphant presentation Chloe had prepared was now irrelevant. The kickoff meeting they had planned was over. Liam's audit had just begun. The game, as Liam now saw it, was not about a single swift act of vengeance. That would have been too merciful. The justice he sought was a slow, methodical dismantling, a public deconstruction of the fraudulent empire Marcus and Chloe had built. His revenge would not be an explosion. It would be the slow, relentless squeeze of a boa constrictor. It would be administered not with anger, but with the cold, unwavering precision of a surgeon. The kickoff meeting had ended with his devastatingly simple question about the caching architecture. The room, once buzzing with arrogant confidence, had fallen into a stunned, tomb-like silence. Marcus, whose entire career was built on a foundation of confident-sounding buzzwords, was left completely exposed. He stammered, his face a blotchy red. "Well, Liam, the strategic imperative was to prioritize a more agile deployment framework," he managed, his words a meaningless jumble of corporate jargon. He tried to deflect, gesturing vaguely to one of the senior engineers. "Jim, you were involved in those stress tests, right?" Jim, a man with a mortgage and a healthy fear of corporate politics, suddenly found the shine on his shoes to be the most interesting thing in the world. Liam didn't press. He didn't need to. He simply nodded, his expression one of patient understanding, which was infinitely more terrifying than anger. "I see," he said calmly. "There appears to be a gap in the documentation. That's fine. We'll need to rectify that before we can officially greenlight the next sprint." He looked directly at Marcus. "Please have a detailed technical brief on my desk by 9 a.m. tomorrow. It should include the full rationale for the architectural change, the complete stress test results, and a risk analysis. We can't move forward on a foundation of ambiguity." With that, he had not only asserted his authority, but had also assigned his former boss a homework assignment he was utterly incapable of completing. The first cut had been made. That week, Liam instituted a new regime. He called it the Daily Technical Alignment. For Marcus and Chloe, it was the daily ordeal. Every morning at 10 sharp, the Innovatech team would gather in the boardroom, and Liam, projecting onto the main screen, would conduct a brutal, line-by-line audit of their progress. This was his theater, and they were his unwilling actors. One morning, he projected a section of the core algorithm of Chimera, a particularly elegant and complex piece of code he had written on a caffeine-fueled weekend months before his termination. "Chloe," he said, his tone perfectly neutral. "As the official project lead, can you please walk the team through the logic of this recursive function? I'm seeing a potential for a stack overflow under certain high-load conditions, and I want to understand your mitigation strategy." The entire room turned to Chloe. She stared at the screen, her expression frozen. The code was like a foreign language to her. She understood the purpose of the algorithm, in theory, from the documentation she had stolen from Liam, but the intricate how was a complete mystery. She began to speak, her voice thin and reedy, stringing together vague technical terms. "Well, the protocol leverages a dynamic resource allocation model to synergize the data stream and prevent the bottlenecks." It was painfully, obviously wrong. The junior developers, who had studied Liam's code, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Liam let the awkward silence hang in the air for a moment before he moved in. "Actually, that's not quite right," he said gently. Then, his eyes scanned the room and settled on a young, bright programmer named Sarah, a woman he knew was talented, but who had always been too timid to speak up under Marcus's bombastic leadership. "Sarah, I seem to recall you flagging a potential issue in this very module a few months back. Your analysis was quite insightful. Could you share your perspective?" This single move was a masterstroke. It simultaneously exposed Chloe's ignorance, validated Sarah's hidden talent, and signaled to the entire team where the true technical authority now resided. Sarah, shocked at being addressed directly, stammered for a moment, but then, seeing the genuine encouragement in Liam's eyes, she began to speak. She explained the nuance of the code flawlessly, even suggesting an elegant solution to the very problem Liam had posed. When she finished, Liam smiled. "Excellent, Sarah. Exactly right. Please write up a formal proposal for that optimization and send it directly to me. We'll be implementing that immediately." In one move, he had publicly humiliated his enemy and anointed his own loyal lieutenant from within their ranks. The slow torture continued relentlessly. Liam buried them in the very administrative weaponry they had once used against others. He demanded weekly progress reports of excruciating detail. He requested strategic justifications for every line item in their budget. He scheduled deep-dive reviews on obscure, legacy components of the system, forcing them into all-night cramming sessions just to avoid looking like complete fools. The strain began to show. The confident, charming facade of Marcus Vance began to crack and peel away. Deprived of his ability to charm his way through problems, he became irritable and paranoid. He was overheard snapping at his own team members for minor issues, his frustration boiling over. His authority, once absolute, was now a joke. The team had seen him unmasked by Liam day after day, and they no longer feared or respected him. Chloe, meanwhile, was slowly being crushed by the weight of her own deception. She lived in a state of constant, high-alert anxiety, terrified of the next daily meeting, the next question she wouldn't be able to answer. She was haunted by the ghost of the man she had betrayed, a ghost who was now calmly and methodically taking back everything she had stolen, piece by agonizing piece. The whispers in the hallways of Innovatech changed. The story of the fired engineer who came back as the all-powerful client was becoming a legend. Liam had successfully isolated his targets, professionally and psychologically. He had turned their own team against them, not through fear, but by simply being more competent. Marcus and Chloe were hollowed-out shells, their credibility destroyed, their confidence shattered. They were adrift, waiting for the final, inevitable blow. The quarterly progress review was staged in the main Innovatech boardroom, a room of polished mahogany and panoramic city views, designed to project an image of unshakable success. The stakes were immense. The CEO, Mr. Henderson, was present, flanked by two of his most senior vice presidents. And at the far end of the table, representing the client, sat David, Chen, and Liam, their calm demeanor a stark contrast to the nervous energy radiating from the Innovatech team. This was not a routine update. It was a high-stakes performance, and for Marcus and Chloe, it was their final, desperate gamble. They began their presentation with a flourish. Marcus, having seemingly regained a sliver of his old, slick charisma, stood before the board and painted a masterpiece of corporate fiction. He spoke of synergistic breakthroughs and paradigm-shifting progress. The slides Chloe presented were filled with elegant, upward-trending graphs, showing productivity, system uptime, and feature completion. Each slide was a beautiful, meticulously crafted lie. They claimed the core engine was operating at 99.8% efficiency. They presented the complex predictive modeling module, Liam's original brainchild, as 100% complete and ready for deployment. They concluded their presentation to a round of polite applause. Mr. Henderson looked pleased, a relieved smile on his face. He turned to the head of the table. "Mr. Hayes, Mr. Chen, impressive, wouldn't you agree? It seems my team has exceeded all expectations." Liam let the silence hang in the room for a moment. He offered a thin, unreadable smile. "It is certainly a compelling narrative," he said, his voice calm and measured. "I just have a few questions for clarification to ensure our understanding at Orion aligns with your data." He looked directly at Marcus. "Marcus, that 99.8% uptime figure is remarkable. For our own verification purposes, could you please direct us to the specific server logs from the past month that substantiate that number? Our automated contractual audits have unfortunately been unable to replicate it." A flicker of panic appeared in Marcus's eyes. "Of course, Liam," he said, his voice suddenly a little too loud. "Those logs are being aggregated by our IT department for the final quarterly report. We'll have them sent over to you shortly." Liam nodded slowly, as if accepting the flimsy excuse. His gaze then shifted to Chloe. "And Chloe, on slide 17, you listed the predictive modeling module as fully complete. A fantastic achievement. Could you just confirm for the board that this module has passed all regression, stress, and security tests as stipulated in Section 4 amperes of our service level agreement?" Chloe's posture stiffened. She had been dreading this. She knew, and she knew that Liam knew, that the module was a buggy, unstable mess after her clumsy attempts to modify it. The preliminary tests were extremely positive, she hedged, her voice tight. The final sign-off reports are just awaiting my final review. Liam leaned back in his chair, the picture of professional patience. I see. He looked at Mr. Henderson. It seems we have a significant disconnect between the presentation and the project's reality. Perhaps, he said, standing up, I can help clarify the situation for everyone. He walked to the head of the table and calmly connected his laptop to the main projector. The vibrant, colorful graphs of Marcus and Chloe's presentation vanished, replaced by the stark, black and white interface of a system terminal. A palpable sense of dread began to fill the room. Regarding the 99.8% uptime, Liam said, his fingers moving deftly across the keyboard. Our contract, as you know, grants us real-time, read-only access to all production servers. On the screen, a cascade of text began to scroll the raw, unfiltered system logs from the Chimera servers. He highlighted dozens of entries in bright red. These red lines are critical error flags, indicating forced system reboots following catastrophic failures. As you can see, there were 14 such failures in the last month alone. The actual, verifiable uptime is 81.7%. The VPs began shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Mr. Henderson's smile had vanished, replaced by a deep frown. Next, the matter of the completed predictive modeling module, Liam continued, his voice still unnervingly calm. He brought up a code comparison tool on the screen. On the left was a version of the code dated 2 months prior. On the right, the current version. On the left is the stable, efficient code as it existed at the start of our partnership. On the right is the module as it exists today. He pointed to several highlighted sections. These modifications, introduced by Ms. Vance's team, have created a memory leak and several critical security vulnerabilities. He then closed the window and opened one more file, a copy of the original code from his personal, time-stamped backups. His own name, L. Hayes, was visible in the developer comments throughout the file. And this is the original code, as I wrote it. As the board can plainly see, the progress of the past few months has in fact been a catastrophic regression that has severely compromised the integrity of the entire platform. Marcus was ashen. Chloe stared at the floor, refusing to look at anyone, but Liam wasn't finished. Mr. Henderson, he said, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more serious. Normally, this level of incompetence would simply be a matter of gross mismanagement. However, our contractual right to audit project-related communications has revealed that this was not simply incompetence, it was a conspiracy. He brought up 2 final images on the screen. They were screenshots of emails. The entire room leaned forward. The first was from Chloe to Marcus, dated 1 week before Liam's firing. It read, Marcus, I have a full copy of his codebase. He trusts me completely. If we frame the next sprint's delays as his fault, I think Henderson will finally agree that he's not a team player, and we can take over. The second email was Marcus's reply. Excellent. Draft the performance review with the points we discussed. I'll handle HR. Your promotion to project lead is guaranteed once he's out of the picture. A collective, sharp intake of breath filled the room. It was all there, in black and white. A clear, undeniable plot. The fraud, the betrayal, the premeditated destruction of a man's career for personal gain. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and damning. Marcus looked like he had been turned to stone. Chloe had buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Mr. Henderson's face was a mask of pure, cold fury. He was not just looking at 2 disgraced employees. He was looking at a multi-million-dollar contract, a partnership with the legendary Orion Strategy Group, and his own reputation, all about to be incinerated by their greed. Liam disconnected his laptop and calmly returned to his seat. He looked at David, then at the terrified CEO. Our client's confidence in this partnership was predicated on the integrity of the Chimera platform and the team leading it, Liam stated, his voice ringing with finality. It is now the official position of Orion Strategy Group that the project leadership at Innovatech has engaged in gross mismanagement, willful misrepresentation of progress, and deliberate, malicious fraud. The future of our partnership is now in serious jeopardy. He had not just 1, He had laid their crimes bare before the world, and in doing so, had placed the fate of the entire company in the palm of his hand. The silence that descended upon the boardroom in the wake of Liam's final, damning evidence was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, thick with the ruin of 2 careers. Marcus Vance sat catatonically, his face the color of old parchment, his eyes fixed on the email projected on the screen, a digital tombstone engraved with his own foolish, greedy words. Chloe was no longer sobbing. She was utterly still, her face buried in her hands, as if she could physically hide from the magnitude of her own disgrace. Mr. Henderson, the CEO, was the first to move. He rose from his chair, his movement stiff with a cold, controlled fury. The survival of his company and his own reputation now depended on his next actions. He looked at Marcus and Chloe, not as employees, but as a cancerous growth that needed to be excised immediately. "Get out," he said, his voice barely a whisper, yet carrying the chilling finality of a judge's sentence. "Both of you, now." When they didn't move, paralyzed by shock, his voice rose to a clipped, authoritative command. "Security will escort you from the building. Your network access has already been revoked. You will be hearing from our legal department regarding the fraudulent misappropriation of intellectual property." Their walk of shame was a brutal mirror of Liam's, yet infinitely worse. They were led out not through a crowd of whispering colleagues, but past the horrified stares of the company's entire senior leadership. The heavy oak door of the boardroom clicked shut behind them, a sound that marked the definitive, ignominious end of their ambitions. With the poison removed, Henderson's demeanor transformed instantly. He turned to Liam and David, his face a mask of desperate contrition. "Mr. Hayes, Liam, and Mr. Chen, on behalf of Innovatech, I am profoundly sorry. What they did, it is an unforgivable stain on this company. We were blind, and I was blind." He looked directly at Liam, his eyes pleading. "We need you. We need your vision to save this project. The position of Vice President of Technology is yours, right now. Name your price, your terms, anything. We will make this right." It was the ultimate vindication, the classic hero's reward. The entire room waited for Liam's triumphant acceptance. But Liam simply shook his head, a calm, resolute expression on his face. "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Henderson, but my place is with Orion Strategy Group now. Our partnership, however, can continue, on one condition." He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. "Our contract contains a key personnel mandate. It gives our client the authority to approve all project leadership. Given the catastrophic failure of the existing management structure, Orion has no confidence in it. Therefore, we are invoking that clause." He scanned the faces of the stunned Innovatic team, his eyes finally resting on the pale, shocked face of Sarah Jenkins, the junior programmer he had championed. "Orion's official and non-negotiable position is this," Liam stated, his voice clear and unwavering. "For the Chimera project to move forward, and for our partnership to continue, the new internal project lead at Innovatech will be Sarah Jenkins. She is the only person on this team who has consistently demonstrated the technical competence, the intellectual honesty, and the integrity required to see this project to its successful conclusion." The shock in the room was palpable. Henderson stared, dumbfounded. He was being dictated to, his own company's promotion structure, overridden by a man he had allowed to be wrongfully fired. But he had no choice. He looked at the signed contract on the table, then at David Chen's stony expression. He was trapped. "So be it," Henderson said, his voice tight, with grudging acceptance. "Miss Jenkins, congratulations on your promotion." Sarah looked from the CEO to Liam, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and overwhelming gratitude. A new order had just been born. A month later, Liam walked through the offices of Innovatech, not as a ghost, but as a client. The atmosphere was transformed, the fear and toxicity were gone, replaced by a quiet, productive hum. He was there for his weekly sync with Sarah in the main boardroom. She was no longer timid. The role had unlocked a confidence and authority in her that was remarkable to witness. She commanded the respect of her team because she had earned it with her skill and her integrity. The Chimera project, now back on its original architectural path, was thriving. As Sarah wrapped up her flawless presentation, Liam found himself looking out the panoramic window, the same window he had seen from the other side of the table on his darkest day. He felt no vengeful glee, no smug satisfaction. Instead, he felt a deep, quiet sense of rightness, of a complex equation finally being solved. He reflected on the nature of the power Marcus and Chloe had so desperately craved. They had tried to seize it by pushing others down, by stealing, and by lying. In the end, their power was an illusion, a hollow shell that shattered under the first contact with real pressure. He, on the other hand, had gained his power by first creating something of undeniable value, and then by using that leverage not just for himself, but to lift someone else up. They thought they could bury him by taking away his job. They didn't realize they had buried a seed. And that seed hadn't just produced his own return, it had given rise to a new, healthier culture, nurtured by the very person they had overlooked. His silence, in the face of their betrayal, had not been an act of weakness or surrender. It was the silence of observation, of gathering strength, of waiting for the perfect moment to act. It was the silence of an architect planning his next and greatest creation. Never underestimate the silence of someone who has endured for too long. Justice has many faces. Sometimes it arrives like a thunderclap, and sometimes it is served in the cold, quiet confines of a boardroom, delivered by the very person you once cast out. Join us next time as we tell the story of a disgruntled IT admin, a single reply-all email, and a corrupt executive's career-ending mistake that was broadcast to the entire company. Thank you for listening.